everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Meredith Preuss, and I'm the Executive Director of the Gordon and Marion Smith Foundation for Young Artists. I'm so pleased to welcome you all to the launch of the first ever Art Education for Life speaker series. To begin, I'd like to thank the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, whose ancestral and unceded land the Gordon Smith Gallery is located on. In 2016, this building, which also serves as the North Vancouver School District's Education Service Centre, was gifted with the Squamish Nation traditional name of Chilhinip, meaning high ground. Together, the Gordon Smith Gallery, Artists for Kids, and the Smith Foundation are committed to making visible histories that have been made invisible. Through the current exhibition, Prevailing Landscapes, we consider how contemporary conceptual artists work to challenge the colonial lens that has shaped the discourse around landscape as a genre within Canada. As evidenced by the great turnout tonight, art is a medium of engagement and dialogue. Through artwork and public programs such as these, we work to support the exploration of identity and relationship building. I'd like to thank Artists for Kids, our partners in programming the Gordon Smith Gallery, and the educational arm of the three organizations. The O'Dane Foundation for their support of this speaker series, as well as Polygon Homes, who will be hosting the reception following this discussion, and Anthem Properties. Additional support was also provided by the North Vancouver Recreation and Culture Commission and the North Vancouver School District. Art Education for Life is a 5-part speaker series designed to serve as a nexus, gathering luminaries from various fields to illuminate the profound impact of art education on their journeys. Over the course of 4 more talks and panels throughout 2024, we will hear from speakers from the world of design, science, business, and art. This talk, Art Education Unveiled, Perspectives from Prevailing Landscapes, brings together exhibiting artists and educators Stan Douglas, Ian Wallace, and Karen Zalamea in conversation with Andrew Booth, collector, curator, and founder of the Vancouver Art Blog. So I'm just going to introduce the artists a little bit. I'll try not to take too much of your time, but we'll start with Stan Douglas. He was born in 1960 and has been creating films, photographs, and multidisciplinary projects since the late 1980s, exploring the boundaries of these mediums and their relationship with technology and collective memory. Based in Vancouver and Los Angeles, he is the chair of the graduate art program at Art Center College of Design and studied at Emily Carr College of Art. Douglas is represented by David Zwerner in Los Angeles, and in 2022, Douglas represented Canada in the Venice Biennale. We also have Ian Wallace, who was born in Shoreham, England in 1943. After completing his studies at the University of British Columbia and graduating with a master's degree in art history, he taught art history at UBC from 1967 to 1970, and at Emily Carr Institute of Art and Design from 1972 to 1998. Wallace was granted an honorary doctorate at Emily Carr University in 2007 and the University of British Columbia in 2010. He's been an active and exhibiting artist in the Vancouver region since 1965. Karen Zalamea is a Filipino-Canadian artist based in Burnaby, Canada, whose interdisciplinary practice employs photographic techniques to explore themes of identity, memory, and placemaking. She has exhibited across Canada and internationally and holds a BFA from Concordia University and a BFA from Emily Carr University of Art and Design. Andrew Booth is a collector and curator of the Vancouver Art Blog, a resource dedicated to promoting and showcasing Vancouver's contemporary art scene. He has spoken on panels across Canada on demystifying the practice of collecting art and the responsibility collectors have in acting as caretakers for an artist's work, and the joy of living with art. Andrew was born in Abbotsford and has been living in the greater Vancouver area since his teens. Okay, now that I've covered everything, I'd like to hand the floor over to Andrew and the esteemed artists. Thank you.
Thank you, that's time. No, I'm just kidding. I'm really honored to be moderating this panel of 3 artists, each of whom have made meaningful contributions to the art scene in Vancouver, in Canada, internationally. And as Meredith mentioned, we're going to be talking about art and education and where those might intersect. But before we do, I want to start on a bit of a lighter note for each of you, and I'll start with Stan. What was one of your earliest, most vivid memories of encountering art?
Okay, I came to art very late. I didn't really know art was contemporary art was a thing. And the graphics teacher said, well, why don't you go downtown? There's a Vancouver Art Gallery. You can go see what's in there. And I did, and it was kind of like blown away that there was art that's not just Da Vinci or Michelangelo, artists relevant to today, done by living people. And so that kind of knocked me out and made me want to become an artist. I was going to do studying theater up to that point. But then when I saw I could do this without depending on other people, that would be a great thing. But of course now I'm doing theater and whatnot.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the first time I went to an art gallery, and I feel like I came to it late as well. Probably the first time I went to the Vancouver Art Gallery was in a 10th grade field trip. And I remember walking up that grand staircase and seeing sculptures by Agatha Dick. They were the porcelain figurines that were encrusted with honeycomb, and she puts found objects in beehives in order to create these sculptures. And I felt really floored by it because I had very limited conceptions of what constitutes visual art. I was expecting perhaps to see an entire gallery full of oil paintings of natural landscapes. And so I distinctly remember seeing these sculptures and thinking, oh, you can do that. And I think that's just the beauty of like encountering art, and that it gives you permission or invites you to think more expansively.
Sorry, what era was this, or around what age were you?
10th grade, so
10th grade.
I would be maybe 14 or 15.
Wonderful. Ian?
Well, I grew up when I was very young in a very small town. There was no such thing as an art gallery anywhere nearby at all. But I loved drawing, and I did a lot of drawings and entertained all my friends with drawing and doing portraits of them and just creating images of my childhood fantasies, basically. So I was my own favorite artist from the beginning, I think I have to say. So, and it just continued from there, basically. And then when we moved to North Vancouver in the early 50s, I was like 8 and 9 years old, I was taking painting in the parks, you know, to develop my artistic skills. But I must say that when I left this small town in the interior, right near the Okanagan and the Boundary Country, the school presented me with an oil painting kit as a going away present. So, which for me was an acknowledgement and real incredible encouragement that I would be recognized and the school would recognize that identity anyways. So, but then later, you know, when I became engaged with art, it became more than just being able to draw and visualize your fantasies. When I studied art history at the university, I began to understand, from my point of view anyways, a larger sense of what art could be and what it's been in the deep past, which was really important to me and still is.
I think that's the thread that I want to pull out here. I can't tell if the mic's working, so I'll just yell. That's kind of the thread that I want to pull out here is the early inspiration or some of those moments that were sort of milestones in your trajectory of becoming an artist and then eventually becoming an educator. So maybe as the next sort of evolution or the next phase of that, who was the first artist that you really fell in love with? In and around that time, perhaps, or further down the road? Maybe start with Ian.
Oh my. Well, if you say first artist, we're talking kind of adolescent interests. Yeah. I would say R. Crumb, who was the cartoonist in Mad Magazine, you know. And I'm not joking. He is an excellent artist and an excellent cartoonist. And I must say, he's an artist that I admired. You know, when you talk about the first artist.
Yes, yeah. Karen, how about you? Putting you on the spot with that one.
The first artist whose artwork I loved, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know. My mind keeps going to early video art that I started watching. So it's not that early, but something that I just keep returning to. When I was in grad school, I was learning how to make video, and a lot of artist work was becoming available for screening on YouTube. And I remember stumbling on the work of the Danish artist Jesper Just, who was making these incredibly beautiful cinematic videos. There's one in particular, I think it's called No Man is an Island, where it's in a darkly lit pub, and there's men. It's only populated by men, middle-aged and older-aged men, sitting by themselves in this bar, drinking or smoking by themselves in silence. And then a young male stands up, and the camera focuses on him, and he starts singing a cappella Roy Orbison's Crying. And as the song progresses, other men in the bar stand up and start harmonizing, and it eventually builds up into a chorus, and then the camera focuses back on the young man's face, and you can see that he's actually crying by the end of the song. And so, anyway, I found it incredibly affective and wanted to find ways of maybe finding strategies of having a lasting effect like that in my own work.
I guess, I mean, coming to it again late, Robert Rauschenberg was somebody who really impressed me, just with the variety of materials it used for the assemblages, but also for the combine paintings, etc. I just never imagined, well, first of all, expanding the idea of what a picture was in my mind is something he did quite radically, and then also using this sort of real-world materials to build work I found amazing as well. And I used to always go down to Equinox Gallery and Ace Gallery and demand that they show me their print drawers and what was in the back room, even though I didn't really understand the concept of commercial gallery, that they're actually there to sell stuff, not to be a service to me, but they're very generous nonetheless.
It worked out. I think it's interesting just from this bit of conversation how you came to art a little bit later. Ian, you started with watercolors and sketches, but your practice evolved into what it is now. Ian's work behind us here, this combination of photographic elements and paintings. Stan, you work with film and photos as well. Karen, sculpture and photos. How did you, and I'll start with you, Stan, how did you get to that point where you picked up a camera, so to speak, and you started to work with the medium that we're familiar with now?
Well, I went to art school doing printmaking. I didn't like the sort of fetish for technique in printmaking when I got to art school. I began doing sculpture instead, and then I did a public work where I deposited a sculpture on a certain location in Vancouver, Jericho Beach Air Station, and enjoyed photographing that more than making the sculpture. And so that was my first step into that. Eventually I made slideshows and I made films, and yeah, always going back to photography as a basis.
So after a high school, I don't talk about this very often, but I actually wanted to be a designer. And then I dropped out because it really wasn't for me. And I took a year off school and I traveled and I lived with my friend and her family in India for a few months. And it was at that time that I really fell in love with photography, and it was the reason why I got up really early in the morning and stayed up late and navigated down pathways I wouldn't normally go to because I had my camera. And so I just knew that I wanted to work more and more in this medium. And so when I came back to Vancouver after traveling, I applied to the photo program at Emily Carr and got in.
And here you are. So Ian, before you start on yours, there's an earlier photograph of yours here of the Lionsgate Bridge collapse, is that correct? Or the second arrows, pardon me?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
So, and the timing of this talk is interesting as well, because you just closed an exhibition at the West Vancouver Art Museum, which, if anyone here saw it, was comparing early drawings and watercolors of particular vantage points in West Vancouver, and then you revisiting those and taking photographs. So eventually, like, not long after those watercolors, you got into photography. What was that evolution like for you?
I think it was fairly amateur photography. And that picture of the lines of the second Narrows Bridge, of the Ironworkers Bridge, it was in 1958 when it collapsed, so I was 15 years old at the time. And I knew it was an important news event, and so I kind of took on the idea of the, photographic reporting on a historical event. I was always interested in history. In fact, in high school, I won the history prize when I graduated from high school. So I've always been interested in the story of how everything has come about. And, you know, by photographing an event like that, you're taking a part of the history. You're participating in acknowledging those events. And of course, in making art, I've always seen, you know, in studying art history, I've always seen myself as participating in the story of art, in the history of art, literally. And hopefully and ideally interesting and influencing other people. And when we're on the topic of art education, I never really taught art courses in art school or anything like that. I only taught art history courses. That was my specialty. But my idea was by making art, you're encouraging and providing models and concepts that other young artists, aspiring artists, can pick up on and make use of. And so it's kind of like teaching by example, I suppose, might be one of the ways to describe it. I'm sorry, I wandered off topic there a little bit.
No, it's good. It's a good segue, because what's also important context here is that you started teaching at a pretty young age, right?
24.
24.
Yeah.
And so this is also in a time when we didn't have Google, we weren't doing classes over Zoom, but yet you were able to bring sort of a global context of what was happening in the art world. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that, how you brought the global art world into your classroom?
Well, I traveled a little bit, and when I traveled, I photographed works of art. I went to New York in a trip on the Eastern Seaboard in 1967, in the summer before I started teaching at UBC, and I had just finished my master's degree at that point. And I just photographed all of the interesting contemporary art that I could see. And I used those slides. I still have those slides of works, and many of them are in the collection at UBC. I just had the fun of, when I was teaching, of doing slide shows and slide lectures showing all my favorite interesting artworks.
And now bringing it a little more to more modern times, Stan, you're the department chair of this program at the Art Center in Pasadena. Can you talk a bit about what the structure of those classes look like? Like, how do you bring your students, how do you bring the art world to your students?
But first I want to say something about my pedagogy at Emily Carr, which I didn't really enjoy that much. I thought the teachers were not really that effective, but in my first year I stumbled upon Ian's Art Now class, which was a visiting artist program with international, national artists speaking about their work, a fourth year class. I took it every year I was at Emily Carr, and that was my best education. Again, like Ian said, education by example. So I saw the examples of these amazing artists who were quite surely chosen, I think. People like, Jack Goldstein, who, had a very, not expansive career, but a very, very a meaningful one. People who became like Eric Bogosian, who was doing performance art then, but became an actor later on. Laurie Anderson, I ran 2 of her shows in Vancouver, which got me into doing slideshows and that kind of thing. And that was all thanks to this guy, I think.
My next question was, Ian, you taught Stan, correct? So you taught Stan. I'm curious to know, what was Stan like as a student, Ian?
He was a real performer himself. Yeah, he did fantastic work and was always like totally provocative questions and really excellent all around. And I was I've had some really amazing people as students in my classes who I learned as much, I have to say this over and over again, I learned as much from them as they ever learned from me. And that's the way I ran my classes. It was a dialogue. I would challenge my students to tell me what they found interesting. Like, tell me what's going on. And so I pick up on that. And Stan was one of those people that was always had his very tuned in to what was going on, not just in art, but in all levels of popular culture and various quite challenging forms of intellectual culture. Like your interest in Samuel Beckett, for instance, was quite unique and interesting and unusual for a student coming out of somebody in Emily Carr at that time.
Karen, you and I were talking before about art education, and we kind of teased this in the intro about it's not just within the walls of an institution. Art education can come in engagements like this and going to artist studios and exhibitions. How do you see yourself, or how would you sort of unpack that concept in terms of art education outside of an institution? What are some examples that come to mind that either you participate in or have thought about?
Well, I think in recent years, because I've taught like as a sessional instructor at Emily Carr, and in the last year or two have participated more in facilitating workshops, so that happen alongside exhibitions or artist residencies. But I've been thinking more about the possibility of informal mentorships and how that can possibly exist. And I keep on coming to the same answers, like where do we have skill sharing and ongoing peer support and generative dialogue, active listening, and the answers I keep on coming back to are friendship and community, and so I'm thinking about that moving forward and maybe trying to find ways of incorporating that as an educator. But I know you don't want to make this about you, but I was teasing that Vancouver Art Blog, in a way, is like evidence of your own art education. I've been following it for a couple of years, and so I see all the shows you go to, and the studio visits and the talks. And I feel like for the rest of us who are watching, it's kind of like a syllabus of what you can see in person in town right now. And I think it's a great service to the exhibiting artists and to the galleries and everybody involved behind the scenes. I think it really encourages the public to go and experience art in person.
The check's in the mail for that coming. But I'll say, and I said this before as well, it's like if I'm not the first person in an opening, it's Ian who's the first person usually. And anyone that is out there gallery hopping knows, Ian is as active as anybody else visiting exhibitions. So maybe Ian, just on that note, I don't want to say why, but you're very active still in terms of, in different ways perhaps than you were as an educator or as an artist. How do you find yourself navigating the Vancouver art scene right now as an artist/educator?
Oh, well, there's so many new young artists out there that I'm just getting to know. And it's, there's more than enough happening in Vancouver to keep one out and active every night of the week.
Case in point with tonight, I think there's several other things going on too. So.
It's a community. It's how people socialize and communicate with each other. And when Stan brought up my visiting artist program that I had going on at Emily Carr, I would bring in, artists I thought were really important and interesting artists. And I'd bring them to Vancouver, put them up at a hotel, give them a program of talks to give over a period of a week. And then at the end of the day, of course, you have to entertain these people. You don't want to bore them. So there would be a party every night. And that was, and of course the students would be there and they would get to meet these people socially out of the classroom. And it was very, just like any opening, it's very ambient and very open-ended. And that's how people communicate. And a lot of it's by accident.
Did Chris Burden party?
Yeah.
Because I remember he came to Emily Carr and didn't want to see anybody, but he would dig a ditch.
Yeah.
And that was his work.
Yep. He dug a ditch near Granville Island. That's when we started at Granville Island. And this is Chris Burden, LA artist. I think the year was 1988, 89, or earlier even. And of course everybody would come and watch him dig the ditch. And one night, some people, I think it was from the Western Front, Eric Metcalf and company, went and filled the ditch in again that he dug. And he just came back the next morning. I would pick him up at the hotel and drive him to dig the ditch. And people would watch him dig the ditch all over again.
Part of me just wants to maybe let the two of you just talk about old stories from those years, but I'm cognizant of time. I want to talk a little bit about art scenes and art communities. I would be remiss not to talk about the Vancouver School of Photoconceptualism, which Ian obviously had a huge part in, and Stan would be a part of as well. But I maybe just want to talk a little bit more about how important it was for you during your art education and immediately following your art education to be a part of a group, a collective, whether it's visual artists or other artists in different areas, poets, musicians, etc. So maybe I'll start here with Stan, actually, if you can speak about being a part of those communities.
I guess like my community was not really artists but poets. There was a group called Kootenai School of Writing, who are still going today with a different configuration of people. But them, plus Art Speak Gallery, which was originally started by KSW, was my first conversational community as an artist. They had these artist-writers talks. We talked about each other's work, and then eventually started a baseball team and played baseball and went to the barn for the meat draw on Sundays. But that was like a real community. But it's a key thing, I think, for any young artist is to have a cohort when you leave school somehow. But I think something we also missed is Vanguard magazine. In which Russell Kazir would tell an artist, like, I think you should write about so-and-so's work. And they learn how to write, they keep a discourse going, and there's a dialogue. And so when we lost Vanguard, we lost a real source of intellectual curiosity and conversation in Vancouver. And that's really why I made the Vancouver Anthology in 1990, to spur conversation again, and to maybe make a certain coming together again.
I think Aura Gallery has copies of that anthology, which everyone should get a copy of. It's a fantastic resource. Karen, how did you find yourself in an art scene throughout your practicing years or art school years, and how did that influence the work that you produced?
For me, it was trying to hang on to that sense of the cohort after graduating, to maintain a sense of momentum after school, and when you no longer have that structure of the deadlines and the group crits. So it was really trying to hang on to my peers who worked in photography and other disciplines as well. And there was a short while here in Vancouver when I was meeting regularly with a group of artists. We kind of had this secret crit club, and we would meet at one of the artists' studios and show each other work and have a meal and drink too. And it was usually when someone was like leading up to a deadline and having a show, and we would, give honest feedback, say what's working, what's not, what you can tweak. And it was just great to have that sense of community and instant feedback from peers that you trust.
Ian, talk a little bit about the early days coming out of school, being, again, involved in a movement that's really put Vancouver on the map to some extent in terms of its artistic output. And by the way, for people in the back, because I can't use the mic, it's not working, just gesture if you can or can't hear me. You're okay? Ian, talk a little bit about that era.
Well, we have to go back to the 60s, really. When I was at UBC, I had excellent students again. Jeff Wall, Rodney Graham, Christos Stikiakos were in my classes and became really good friends. And but that was right at the time when there was the rise of, I was primarily interested in painting, abstract painting, but there was the rise of conceptual art, and artists such as Ed Ruscha and many others in the New York School, Dan Graham, Robert Smithson, etc., were starting to use photography in a documentary way to register their interest in the everyday world around us as a subjects on which to think about contemporary art through. And that was a big influence. And I, along with the others like Rodney Graham, Jeff Wall, and Christos Stikiakos, who organized the first major photo show at UBC in 1969 when he was still a student. He was a curatorial student of Elvin Balkind at the Fine Arts Gallery there at UBC. He did the first photo show that included all of the Vancouver artists and bringing in the artists from outside like Ed Ruscha, Dan Graham, Robert Smithson, et cetera, et cetera. And of course that aspect of you might say the international conceptual art use of photography was linked together to what we found to be interesting to do here. And of course, in the immediate decades, you had the Pictures People movement, the Pictures movement in New York, Barbara Kruger and Sherry Levine, et cetera, and a whole range of artists using photography for their work. And so, you know, I just saw what we were doing was just part of an international global movement. And it just seemed natural to do because everybody globally was in touch with what everybody else was doing. And so I called it Vancouver Photoconceptualism, but that was one article I wrote. It was published in a magazine in Montreal in 1993, I think, a bit later. And it kind of got picked up as a term. It seemed to make sense to me, but.
Are you okay with the term? Like, is it?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. It's useful, sort of useful, I think.
So, and that was around the time, 1970, I guess, was the glue pour with Robert Smithson and Christos Dikiakos.
Yep.
So it was soon after that.
Yeah.
Those artists came to Vancouver and were actually, you know, there's a Lucy Lepard show that happened in
The
around
Lucy
that time.
shows, yeah, the Lucy number shows, they're called, yeah.
The 955,000 show. On the topic of conceptualism, I wrote this question down. I'm not sure if it's going to make any sense, but as an educator, how do you convey the principles of conceptualism to your students? In other words, how do you teach conceptualism in a classroom? You can teach them technical skills, you can teach them how to use, you know, research perhaps, but is that even possible to do, or do you just sort of let them figure that out on their own?
I never taught conceptualism.
No, that's why I didn't know if it would.
I just talked about artists who could be called conceptual artists because they worked with various ideas and weren't afraid to write and use difficult language often. My thing with students at the time was don't be afraid to use ideas and think and you know, be literate too, like write. And I used to challenge my students. I said, look, if you can write a review of an artist, could even be a friend of yours, who has an exhibition in the city, and get it published in one of the magazines, you get an automatic A, period. You know, which was, you know, a real inspiration to students to, you know, pick up the pen and start writing about their friends and, you know, making sense of the ideas that everybody was working with.
Karen, on the topic of, and sticking in the classroom for a minute, it feels like nowadays there's fewer and fewer moments for criticism. I'm curious to know about, during your time as an educator, how important was it to introduce the idea of art criticism or that practice in the classroom in terms of, you know, providing that feedback to those students?
Well, that would exist within like the framework of a group critique, which usually is at the end of a semester with final projects. And I always emphasize to my students that this is a formal presentation and something to prepare for. You know, always review, if you're presenting prints, for example, review them, know how you're going to sequence them, how you're going to present them on the wall, on a table. This is going to affect its reading, and prepare what you want to say. And so I often structure my critiques in a way where I try to encourage participation. Sometimes, you know, within a group dynamic, they tend to be quiet, and so an easy way in is to, as a group, just observe. Simply, let's name what exactly we see, and then after that, we can expand from there and analyze how those individual elements are working together. And then from there, we can expand further and think about, okay, what potential ideas, themes, narratives, issues is this artist bringing up? And so, you know, when I think about group crits, it's not only beneficial for the student who is presenting their work, but it's also beneficial for the entire group because it's an opportunity to work on how you're articulating your response to an artwork.
Stan, do you participate in crits in your program as well, or did you in the 15 years that you've been there?
Oh yeah, it's very much a discursive program with group crits every week, weekly meetings with core faculty, visiting faculty. There's a lecture series that's quite high-end, and those people, critics, artists, and writers, will meet students as well. So it's very discursive all the time. In addition to elective courses that are usually quite academically heavy. But to sort of answer that question but previously, I think of myself as more of like a shrink, a psychoanalyst than as a professor. I don't really teach anything, but I think, I've never been under therapy, but I think that the goal is the same, is to give somebody the language to speak about something they can't speak about, or to do something or stop doing something that they should do or stop doing. So just to figure out a common language to make that clear and articulate that is, I think, the goal of education.
And the program that you're a part of has an incredible roster of visiting artists and graduate artists as well. Yeah. Can you name some of those just as ones that stick to mind? Like,
it was founded by the original faculty were Mike Kelly and Steve Perino. So there's two well-known names and quite influential in the LA scene. This is the word. I mean, somebody asked me, "Who's your favorite student?" I was totally stumped by that as well. So this, I find, is a bit of a stumping question as well. I mean, one of my colleagues, Dana Thader, is a graduate from that program as well. Yeah, there's many, many great people and faculty we've had.
A major part of your practice is collaborating with other artists, poets, musicians, filmmakers. I guess from an art academic side, how do you encourage that with your students, or what's the how did you foster that in your programs? And this is a question for the group, but collaborating beyond just the core group, if at all possible.
I think the main thing to let them know is that if you can't do somebody, you can find somebody who can do that for you. And I mean, I've learned from the technicians I've worked with in projects how to do things. Like my first films were, well, first it was like found footage, then a single take, then montage, 30 and 60 seconds, eventually more and more greater duration, more elaborate scenarios. But I do things occasionally where I just work by myself and take photographs out in the wild, and that's also quite satisfying, but a very, very different context altogether.
We're going to do Q&A in a minute, so if you have questions percolating, we'll try and get a mic to you, so be prepared for that. Final question for the three of you, and we'll start with Ian. What's something that you know now that you wish you knew when you graduated from art school?
Well, I never went to art school.
That's...
But,
well, then how did you, maybe I'll flip the question around. If you didn't go to art school, how did you get into teaching then? What was that journey like? Because you became an instructor at 24.
Yeah, it was, I had to pay the rent. And
no, but how did you get into it? You just applied? Did you walk up and...
I taught for art history for 30 years, and it was a pleasure from the beginning to the end. And then I retired 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago, and just focused on my development of my exhibiting career, you might say, which took off and was pretty demanding. And what I wished I knew then that I need to know now is how to end it all. I mean, you kick off an exhibiting career, and where's it going? What does it add up to? How do you end it? Because I'm getting towards the end of it. I'm into my 80s now, and so I don't have a lot of years left. So that's something that young artists should think about. Like, what is, do they have a vision of the trajectory of their total life's ambition, their career, you might say. And I think I've made some mistakes in the development of my career, but on the whole, I feel
There's a lot to be proud of, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I feel good about it.
Good, you should. Karen, question to you again, outside of art school. What's something you know now that you wish you knew then?
This is the long game. It's a marathon, and be patient. And it can be really frustrating, and sometimes feel like all of your efforts aren't amounting to anything. But I'm a firm believer that all of those efforts, even if they're invisible, if they're not acknowledged, if it's not exhibited, if it's not written about, it still exists. I feel like it accumulates. It's like that law of motion. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so I think, I wish I had known that early on.
Stan.
I got no way. I have no idea how to answer the question, but I guess the most important thing is the more you know what you don't know, and that's like when you're. But however, not knowing what you can't do lets you try things that otherwise be impossible, and you often do achieve something that should be impossible one way or another. So I guess I kind of began doing that right away. Like but taking big bites that I couldn't necessarily chew, and then finding out some way to get that thing down.
Let's maybe pivot to some audience Q&A. If there's anybody that has a question, you can raise your hand. I think.
Seeing we're in Gordon Smith's living room, I thought it'd be a good question. How did Gordon Smith influence each of you?
Maybe Ian, if you want to start.
Well, I don't know how old I was, but I was maybe about 13 or 14 or something. And I grew up in West Vancouver. And he showed at the new design gallery in West Vancouver on Marine Drive, represented Gordon's work. And I do remember one day seeing his work in the window of the new design gallery. That was run by Abe Rogatnik and Alvin Balkin, by the way. I remember, it's strange how I remember it so clearly. Oh, this is how you make abstract art, you know. So I learned from that, you know, like this is an abstract painting in front of me. And I liked it. I was too shy to go in the gallery, but the works were in the window of the gallery. And that was my first exposure to Gordon's work.
Didn't he also hire you at UBC?
Pardon?
Did he hire you at UBC?
No.
Oh, who did?
No, he was teaching in the art education department. I was teaching in the art history department. Yeah.
I guess same question to either of you two, if you have an anecdote or memory there.
Well, I would say my relationship would be more to this space as a part of Gordon Smith's legacy with the gallery and Artists for Kids. I was fortunate a year and a half ago to be the photo enrichment mentor with Artists for Kids and to work. Actually, that's how I met Jackie Wong, the curator of this exhibition. And so it was a really fruitful experience to workshop with senior high school students. And I've also had experience like exhibiting in this space and knowing that my artwork in this exhibition and a previous exhibition had been a part of like elementary school curriculum and as a form of engagement, I think was, it was knowing that I could participate in that way as both an educator and as an artist. That's how I'm feeling attached to this space and to Gordon Smith's legacy.
I don't really have any influence from Gordon, but I did have one personally, just by going to his home and having dinner with him and his friends to understand that network and sort of that history, just through storytelling, was probably the biggest influence he had on me.
Good question. Any other questions here? We have one right here.
Thank you. Oh, it's loud, very loud. I'm an elementary school teacher by trade, and I'm doing my PhD in art education at SFU. I want to elaborate on something that you just talked about with workshopping with young people, and you also talked about community and learning from example, learning from artists, you know, doing the work right in front of you. I'm wondering what, if any, role that kind of pedagogy can play, art workshopping, artists doing the work in front of students in other subject areas outside of the art classroom, like in science or social studies or mathematics.
Either of you want to start with that one?
Well, I think anybody that's in the field of teaching younger people have to be very creative themselves with how they communicate. Because young people can be very demanding, as we know, and to catch their attention and stir their imagination, whatever the field is, mathematics or sciences or art, demands that the teacher, the instructor, be equally creative or even more creative and keep the interest of students up and alive so that they're happy to perform for you and learn in the process. I guess that's a simple answer to that.
All of your artists and all of your educators, this question might have been answered throughout other questions, but how has your practice of being an educator influenced your own art?
I think the most valuable thing about teaching is being aware of what young people are thinking about, because often you're, if I'm in my studio, in my own head, thinking about my own sort of milieu, that's one thing. But when these students come in and they've got a completely different angle on the same subjects, that's quite refreshing and like educational for me as well. So it is really a two-way street. And in the end, I think they teach themselves to a certain degree. We provide a context in which learning can happen, but the cohort of students are talking about things which are relevant to them for that generation at that moment. And we can facilitate that, but we can't necessarily participate in that.
I agree. It keeps you on your toes. Working with new young artists and younger generations, like those who are in university right now were born in the year 2001, 2002. So it's a whole other life, being born after in this new millennium. And so trying to meet them halfway too, if they're dealing with subject matter that I might not necessarily know, I feel a certain responsibility to then research so that I can participate in those conversations and help with the development of their work.
Yeah, likewise, for me, the key is research. I'm constantly learning myself. I'm pretty well every day I'm researching. I'm reading, mostly I'm a very bookish person. I read a little bit in French every day to keep my French in good shape, because there's a lot of amazing literature in French, and I have a very good French library in my studio. But research and keeping my own intellectual interests as well as my artistic production alive and fresh just keeps me alive and fresh, I think. And so that I have a really broad and deep sense of where I think I'm gone in my work and where I'm going and where I can take it. And I don't actively do educational programs per se. I haven't been teaching within an institution for the past 25 years, but it's an open story now. I mean, anybody looking at my work and that's asking questions about it might come into contact with some of the things that I find interesting and have found interesting and that I've learned from. And it's a constant open learning situation for everybody all through their lives. And that's inspiring.
Any other questions in the crowd here?
I have a question. I can be loud enough, I think. So I'm curious how you see the arts education context shifting to meet or not meet the critical moment that we're in. So in your institutions, particularly saying, like, I understand you moved from faculty role to a chair role, how have you seen the context, the contemporary context, affecting or not affecting pedagogy?
How do we see the contemporary context affecting or not affecting pedagogy? Again, the pedagogy will be as different as the people coming in for dialogue with students. And we bring in people from all kinds of areas, not just art makers, but also critics, curators, philosophers, so all those ideas are coming in. We try to stay as sort of current in the terms of contemporary discourse, which determines who we bring in as guests, both on the local scene in LA and internationally. So I think it is through the people that it stays relevant. I couldn't really see a way of making that happen institutionally in a stable fashion, but it's really a question of, it's a people-based thing. And what knowledge do these people who are sharing their knowledge have to impart on the students?
Thank you.